This TikTok is going viral right now because at face value it looks kind of concerning, and there are tons of comments of people saying that this isn't real or that these are prosthetics. But this is very much real. This is the grandfather of this TikToker who is a practicing Buddhist monk and is etching towards the Great Transition. There are many cultural practices and beliefs within Buddhism that concern the end of life and view things in a different way. For instance, there are many practicing monks who would cite several different bodies where most people would consider them to be dead, but they believe that these are actually monks who are in a long-term state of deep meditation. The practice is known as Soko Shinbutsu, in which one can peacefully and gracefully transition into a state of living mummification. Astroworld was one of the most horrific and preventable tragedies in music in the last decade or more, for which Travis Scott is 100% responsible. But surrounding the tragedy and most of the media coverage around it have also been released a series of videos that have mostly gone without explanation. After a long hiatus, we are back with True Crime by State covering Delaware, which of course means we have to hear about the story of the Route 40 killer. But before we get started, if you are loving Creep Time and you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram in my bio. I have tons of extra content on there. When bodies started turning up, the majority of which were S-workers along Route 40, tensions in the state became very high as the perpetrator who was behind these acts was a mystery. But all of the bodies had one piece of evidence in common: fibers of blue carpeting from inside a car. An undercover female officer posed along Route 40 as an S-worker, hoping that she would catch a stopping car so she could find the man behind this. And then Stephen Brian Pennell pulled up, and he was initially very shy, he avoided eye contact, but what immediately caught her attention was the blue carpeting inside that vehicle. This was the guy. He was found guilty, but in a stranger twist of events, he himself requested the death penalty. Just about a week or two ago, hundreds of birds were caught on camera unexplainably dropping from the sky. But before we get into this video, if you are loving Creep Time and you want additional creepy content, make sure that you check out my YouTube, my Twitter, and my Insta in the bio. I have tons of extra content on there. So this event actually took place in Chihuahua, Mexico, which, yes, happens to be the home of the legend of La Pascualita. But the circumstances surrounding the fall from the sky were difficult for even experts to explain. So the running theory from several sources suggested that they had entered some sort of pollution cloud or an electrical force that sent the entire flock to the ground. But ecologists believe that they may have actually been attacked mid-flight by an unknown aerial predator. It would have been something that could have caused them to lose stability or collide with each other before plummeting. But we're unclear as to what that predator could be, as this is not a common occurrence. So what do you think really caused this? I get chills like every single time that I tell this story. Okay, so this is Eric Lewis. He was a highly experienced mountain climber who ends up going missing on Mount Rainier. But the story behind this is creepy as hell. So he embarks on this climb with two other climbers who were all attached by a rope, with him being in the back of the group. But at some point on this climb, when the climber who was in front of him went to go pull on the rope so they could, tug him in, they realized that the rope had gone completely slack. And when they do pull in the rope, they see that the rope was actually cut clean, which would indicate that Eric had actually cut himself off the rope and away from the group for an unknown reason. And once they knew he was gone, they alert, rangers, and a search party goes up there for 3 days, but they never found him. They only found his backpack and no footprints. Whatever caused him to cut himself off that rope and separate from the group remains an unknown, as he has never been found. Growing up watching Courage the Cowardly Dog, did you know that it was based off of a real place called Middle of Nowhere, New Mexico? The concept was inspired by this rural location where feasibly there are very few people still left, but it did fixate on an elderly couple that did go missing after they started to report strange sightings. Although never proven, it's believed that their disappearance, as well as countless others, was at the hands of David Parker Ray, who was a notorious assailant who lived just 7 miles away from here. The couple was never found, but their dog was left behind, which bore the concept of Courage the Cowardly Dog and his elderly caretakers. This is one of the worst cases of Munchausen's I have ever heard of. There is allegedly a woman who picked at her legs all the way through to the bone. I'm cautioning an extreme warning for this one. We know about Munchausen's by proxy, but Munchausen's can be applicable to oneself if you are intentionally perpetuating your own injury or illness to remain unwell. A former ballerina presented with horrific sores on her legs on social media, claiming to have a rare illness. But her followers on social media chimed in when they noted that these wounds looked self-inflicted, but nonetheless, she continued to pick through skin, through muscle, through nerves, and eventually down to her bone. But by the time the infection became emergent, doctors could not save her legs as she had intentionally destroyed them. She had ensured that they would both become infected. She now lives as a double amputee and insists that this was a mysterious illness out of her control. Munchausen's is a mental health crisis, but there are resources for help and there are roads to recovery. Thank you to everybody who requested repeatedly that I cover the case of Lizzie Borden. After reading about it, I now understand why. Lizzie Borden was a young woman who was living out with her family in Massachusetts in the 1800s. Her mother had actually died, so she was living with her father and stepmother, and tensions ran extremely high in that house. But what made this case famous was August 4th, 1892, when sometime that morning, Lizzie's father and stepmother were brutally ended, her father being on this couch. Her stepmother received 40 strikes to the skull using a hatchet axe, and her father 41. Lizzie is arrested, and there are a ton of counterclaims of people saying they heard her laughing at the time this happened, other people in the house who said they didn't hear a thing. But she was eventually found not guilty by a jury of 12 men due to the fact that there was no physical evidence that could link her to these crimes. She was given her freedom, and the Borden house still remains to this day as a horrifying staple of Fall Rivers, Massachusetts. 3 scary movies that were based on real stories, and the third one is absolutely insane. Scream just made yet another resurgence of the franchise as kind of the campy classic in the horror genre. But this whole franchise actually has some truth behind the original concept, as it was inspired by the Gainesville Ripper of Florida, who took the lives of 5 students seemingly for no motive other than just to gamify the killings. He even posed the bodies so that when others found them, it was horrifying. Child's Play is a movie that I would have never imagined to have had some truth behind it. But the original concept that inspired the script was actually based on Robert the Doll, which was gifted to a child in the early 1900s by a woman who practiced voodoo, and people claimed this doll could walk and talk on its own. Open water is a nightmare concept of a couple that gets left behind on a boating tour in shark-infested waters. But this exact scenario did happen to a real-life couple who were also left in shark-infested waters. Kaylin Lauder was a 30-year-old social worker who was living out in Utah in 2014. She ends up hitting a rough patch after being laid off from her job, but was regularly looking for work until her behavior suddenly shifted. Without any history of mental illness or abusing 911, she ends up making a series of emergency calls where she's claiming that there are people outside of her condo at her door. But when police arrived, there's nobody there. Even stranger, the following morning, she's captured on the security camera outside of her condo where she's standing in the rain, crying, talking to someone who's not there. She then runs from the parking lot barefoot for an unknown reason, and this was the last time she was ever caught on camera. Months later, her body was discovered hidden under a bridge 5 miles away from her last known whereabouts, but here's the eerie part. A medical examination could not determine what happened to her. She had no injuries to the body and no substances that could explain the behavior. And during that 5-mile journey, not a single person claimed to see her. This conspiracy has always freaked me out. Allegedly, when Avril Lavigne debuted in 2002, she found the fame incredibly difficult to handle, so her label employed a look-alike. An actress named Melissa Vandella, who was typically used for paparazzi diversions as well as red carpet events. But it was reported that around this time, Avril Lavigne ended things due to severe depression, but a record label, having already invested millions of dollars, still did own the commercial name Avril Lavigne. The theory being that Melissa Vandella was then trained and employed to step into her place full time and just assumed this role of Avril. But the reason people believe this theory is that they've mostly spotted the key differences in just how much Avril has changed between 03 and 04. Physically, yes, but even her handwriting seemed to change, and the most perplexing being her speaking voice.
I want to be singing someone else's lyrics. I want to be singing mine and what came from my heart and my opinions and how I believe and how I think.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here for the grand opening of Koi. It's my favorite restaurant. My favorite sushi restaurant in the world.
But what freaks me out the most about this is that if you look up articles about this conspiracy when it first broke like 5 years ago, most of the videos and pictures supporting this story have actually since been deleted. So if there's no truth to it, why? In 2010, 20-year-old Amber Tuckero decided she wanted to go into the city to do some solo exploring on a night out. So she hitchhiked a ride with an unknown man who said he would take her into the city of Edmonton, but Amber would never make it. While on the drive, she suddenly realized that something was very wrong when he started driving through back roads. She had no cell service but managed to record this audio on her phone. It is the only evidence we have of some of her final moments.
We're not going into the city, are we? No, we're not. Then where are these roads going to? 50th Street. 50th Street. Are you sure? Absolutely. No, where are we going? 50th Street. 50th Street. 50th Street. East, right? East.
Exactly how old would you guess this woman is? For those who are unfamiliar, the Death House landlady went down in Sacramento's history as one of the most unusual serial killers the county had ever seen. Her name was Dorothea Puente. She was a woman with a traumatic childhood who exhibited tendencies of a pathological liar. Around the 70s, she reinvents herself as this sort of older Christian woman who would run a boarding house where she takes care of the elderly. But Dorothea was only in her 50s and was intentionally making herself look older to upkeep this image as the harmless caregiver. But when police came knocking to investigate a tenant who had gone missing, they noticed that her garden had all fresh soil. Upon inspecting a little further, they uncovered the remains of 8 rotting bodies. These were tenants that Dorothea had given sleeping pills to and buried, and then still collected their government benefits, making her one of the most sly killers in Sacramento's history. The unsolved final footage of Lars Mittank is just as chilling as it is confusing. But the story really starts back in 2014. This is 28-year-old Lars, and he ends up taking a trip to Bulgaria with his friends. So at a night out at a bar, he ends up getting into an argument with several unknown men, which results in a fight, and he ends up rupturing his eardrum. Because of his injury, he insists that his friends are going to fly back without him and he's just going to stay behind and recover for a few days. But as soon as he's left behind in the hotel, this is when the strange and erratic behavior becomes almost immediate, and he starts becoming paranoid and thinks there are men following him. Which then leads us to this final footage where we see Lars arriving at the airport, presuming that he's there to catch a flight because he has luggage in hand, but then for an unknown reason we see him sprinting out of the terminal into the parking lot, and this was the last time he has ever been seen on camera. To this day, what Lars thought he was running from or where he went remains a complete unknown in this case. The mystery of Kate Yup is still very much unexplained. Kate Yup was a YouTuber who would make mukbang videos where she would eat excessive amounts of food. These were not normal videos. Kate was eating aggressively fast, almost like she was being starved or she was forced. She also wears a blindfold in every video, so her identity is completely unknown. But viewers became seriously concerned when they started to notice warning signs that Kate might be under someone's control. There are indicators that there was somebody else in that room with her while she's eating all of this food. You can hear him breathing in the background of her videos. She's eating so fast that in one video she actually chips her teeth, and when she shows them to the camera, these are teeth that are rotted. But the most compelling evidence to support that Kate Yup could be a victim of trafficking are the cryptic messages that she's left in the text editing of her videos. Since this all kind of blew up in the media, the channel has gone totally dark and there hasn't been a new video in years. Videos like these that claim to capture urban legends on camera just freak me out so bad. The story behind this is the legend of Tatak Duende, which is a mythical creature most commonly found in Mayan folklore. But the generational stories of these things just take on like a whole new meaning of creepy when people start claiming to capture them on film. Three of the scariest bridges in America and why you should avoid them at all costs. The Captain William Moore Bridge is a semi-traditional suspension bridge located in a scenic gorge in Alaska. But what makes this bridge terrifying is that it was built on an active earthquake fault. So to keep the bridge from falling apart in the event of an earthquake, only one side of it is balanced and fully secured, meaning the bridge can rock in either direction. The Royal Gorge Bridge is definitely a scenic Colorado view for anyone who can handle its height. What freaks people out about this bridge is that the guardrails do get pretty short at certain parts, meaning the 1,000-foot drop is something you may not want to look down during your stroll. The Deception Pass Bridge is really not too bad of a drive at face value if you ever find yourself in the Washington area. But what makes this bridge unusually strange are the increasingly high numbers of accidents and unalivings that take place here. So much so that unalivings have jumped to 15 per year and no one knows why. This is a 1940s ventriloquist doll. It's from the World War II era, and it was captured on camera, moving on its own. So the story behind this is that the doll is actually owned by a collector named Michael Diamond. He's a Liverpool man and a father of 2. But he noticed that the latch on the glass case kept opening night after night, so what he did was he set up a camera, assuming that he was going to catch one of his children doing it, and this was the footage he captured.